Hey everyone, I just wanted to remind you that we are collecting money for the Farmer Fund, which is going to support farmers who are impacted by natural disasters, which is so important and necessary for not only their livelihood, but also for us and rebuilding our food supply chain. The Farmer Fund directly goes to farmers in the Southeast, and that's particularly helpful right now after the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, particularly in Asheville and around the North Carolina area.
Annie Brashem is a licensed clinical social worker in the Bay Area in California, and she works directly with people and their loved ones who've experienced many different types of illnesses and medical events. She's journeyed alongside people in outpatient palliative care, acute care hospitals, and skilled nursing facilities. Her passion is accompanying those facing neurological conditions like Parkinson's, stroke, dementia, ALS, multiple sclerosis, and neuromuscular conditions, as well as those dealing with cancer, heart and lung problems, kidney disease, autoimmune disorders, and more. While illness and caregiving are universal experiences, Annie believes that it's an extraordinarily rich time to engage in therapy and find meaning and purpose in ourselves, our relationships, our life histories, and hope for the future. In today's episode, we talk all about palliative and hospice care, and this, of course, means we are talking about death and dying. Towards the very, very end of the episode, we do also talk about medical aid in dying. And so if this is hitting a little too close to home for you and you're not in a place to be listening to this episode right now, please do skip this episode. Additionally, if you are struggling with any thoughts of harming yourself or harming somebody else, and you do want help and support in moving out of that space, please call or text 988, which is our national suicide hotline, and they can get you the help that you need.
The Chronic Illness Therapist podcast is meant to be a place where people with chronic illnesses can come to feel heard, seen, and safe while listening to mental health therapists and other medical professionals talk about the realities of treating difficult conditions. This might be a new concept for you, one in which you never have to worry about someone inferring that it's all in your head. We dive deep into the human side of treating complex medical conditions and help you find professionals that leave you feeling hopeful for the future. I hope you love what you learn here, and please consider leaving a review or sharing this podcast with someone you love. This podcast is meant for educational purposes only. For specific questions related to your unique circumstances, please contact a licensed medical professional in your state of residence.
Why don't you start by telling us, who you are, what you're doing, where you are, and anything that feels relevant before we kind of get into the hospice and palliative care topic.
Yeah. So I'm Annie. I'm a therapist in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I work only with people with serious or chronic illness and caregivers and also loss, bereavement in my private practice. And I spent the last decade or so working in medical social work and mostly palliative care as a palliative care social worker, doing home visits and clinic visits, telehealth. And I find it just really important to, like you were saying, dispel the myths. I think that palliative care and hospice can be really scary for people with illness. Um, and I don't think it needs to be that way.
I
Yeah.
would love to hear more about that. What makes it less scary?
Yeah. Let's see. We can start with just like what is the
Sure. Yeah.
difference?
Yeah.
So, palliative care is specialized medical care for people living with a serious illness. This type of care is focused on providing relief from the symptoms and stress of the illness. The goal is to improve quality of life for both the patient and the family.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, please, please.
And am I right in that palliative care is, so it's still for, serious illness, terminal illness as well? Does it always have to be terminal or not always?
Yeah. So, I think that's the hard thing in talking about palliative care is that because it's not super regulated by Medicare and Medicaid. A lot of programs are different throughout the country. So, like, I know what the programs are in my area, but that might be different around the country, or different health systems in the same area might have different palliative care programs. Um, so it's hard to make a super specific answer, but um, I would say life-limiting illness is kind of a general term. So for the program I used to work for, we generally saw people who did have their illness was life-limiting within the next possibly couple years, maybe. But the very traditional broad palliative care is just anyone with a serious illness that's impacting them. So that would be, yeah, as broad as we can go. It's just with limited resources, I think a lot of programs are focusing on people that might have more limited life expectancy, if that makes sense.
That brings up a lot of thoughts for me. Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm like, man, how many of us would not progress more if we just had proper support?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we can go down that road. Maybe even talk so every palliative care is different, but what are some of the supports and benefits? Like what depending on the program, people might expect to gain what?
Yeah. So generally palliative care teams are interdisciplinary. So doctors, nurse practitioners or PAs, nurses, social workers. That's kind of the standard, I would say. And then other programs might have a pharmacist or a chaplain or physical therapy, or a variety of other services that they provide, or specialists that you can meet with. And it really takes like a whole person, whole family approach. So um, I always used to tell people, we won't know I can't come in and say this is what we're going to do because I really want to get to know you, what's important to you, what are you needing, and then we customize the care to that. So maybe that's really taking a deep dive into your medications and figuring out, do we need all of these medications? Can we adjust some medications? Do we add some medications? Maybe that's providing counseling or resources from the social worker. Maybe that's answering your questions about what your illness is, what to expect. We have a lot of time to really dive deep into that. Our appointments would be at least an hour sometimes, to answer all of your questions, communicate with the other members of your medical team, kind of like what you would expect and want illness care to be,
Yeah.
but isn't in the rest of the healthcare system.
That's exactly what I'm gathering.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad the resources are there for those suffering the most. I think that's important. And I just keep wondering what we can do to just make this a cultural norm.
Right. Right.
And our care is just more like that. But so maybe we can say a little bit more about the difference between that then and hospice.
Yeah. So with palliative care, I think of it as like an umbrella term for caring for people with serious illness. And you can have palliative care. I think this is one of the biggest myths is you can have palliative care while receiving active treatment. So if you have cancer and are having radiation or chemotherapy or immunotherapy, you can have palliative care. Surgeries, there's no rules per se regarding your care. It's alongside your regular medical care. It does not take over or change your regular medical care. It's an added layer of support. Hospice is a subset of palliative care for people who have meet two criteria only. One criteria is that they have a limited life expectancy. So you hear that 6 months or less, which again is a whole thing we can talk about, but an approximation we would anticipate of life expectancy. That's one. And two is that you want comfort-focused medical care provided where you live. So when people are wanting hospice care, they are saying, I want to allow the natural process of my disease to unfold. We're not trying to hasten death. We're not trying to prolong life, allowing the natural process. But that doesn't mean we can't provide lots of treatment and care. There's always lots of things we can do. Yeah, I think that's the main difference. Also, I guess hospice is a set through Medicare. So through the federal government, it's a set of services, the Medicare benefit. And then if you don't have Medicare, those insurance companies kind of follow the same model. So it's a very specific set of services, and you're going to find a lot more consistency, I think, around the country, though there's still differences.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it's focused on comfort. So, for example, that might mean I'm not taking medication to prolong my life. I'm not doing chemotherapy if I have cancer. But I am getting a morphine drip. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I think that's another big big question a lot of people have and a big myth is that like hospice equals morphine or hospice equals pain management. And that can be part of it because they want to improve quality of life and reduce suffering. So if you're in pain or having symptoms, then they would provide medicine and other supports to help reduce that. But if you're not having pain or not interested in that, there's no requirement.
Mhm.
And I would say the vast majority of people don't have a drip per se. They would take like maybe or like pills or liquid or something. Um,
Just can you
yeah.
paint the picture then, what that does look like, especially obviously movie scene,
Hmm. Hmm.
drip, your own hot,
Hmm.
yeah. Can you paint the picture like we were watching a movie? Like, what would those scenes look like?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I don't think I've ever answered that, so it might stumble on it. But
Okay.
I think there's a bunch of different ways it can look. So some people go on hospice and they're still really active, right? They might be just deciding, I'm not going to have another round of chemo, or there isn't another treatment that can be offered to prolong my life for whatever illness. So they are actually still getting up and going out and going to the grocery store, golfing. Like there's functionally they're doing well, maybe. And the benefit of that is that you get to know your hospice team. They come visit you at least weekly. And then when things are kind of happening, you already have that relationship and feel that trust.
Love that
So
part. That's so
that
important.
can, yeah, yeah. And I think that's another myth is that people think, oh, okay, I need to sign up for hospice in my last days or weeks of life. And
Yeah.
really, hospice can be provided for months or years. That 6 months can be prolonged if you still qualify. So that's one image is like just kind of someone who's still living a living life well. Um, I mean, that's a difficult term, I guess, but still kind of our standard, like going out doing stuff.
Yeah. What you're describing is building a relationship with your medical professionals, and that in and of itself, I mean, that already is so therapeutic to know that there's a team around you that you trust because you've been with them for a while.
Mhm,
Oh, and when
mhm,
it does get to that point, which is already scary enough, there's
mhm,
a resource around you of like, I trust what's around me and
mhm,
I can move through this
mhm,
better and more easily
mhm.
um, than if I just was around 10 new doctors or people that I just don't even know.
Yep.
And now I'm
Yeah.
supposed to expect that they're gonna like help me the right way.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so
Yeah. No, totally. It's it's a super important part of the process, and also the rules unfortunately make it
Mm.
so that it's less likely that people are gonna take advantage of these services sooner because of these rules. Like you can't be having chemotherapy. You can't um if you're wanting something that's only provided in the hospital, then that's generally not on hospice. So there are rules that I don't necessarily agree with and don't fit with modern medicine and what people need and want for their care. I'm hoping that that changes over time. But yeah, it is as you were saying, like there's all these folks. So with hospice, you get a doctor, though you can keep your own doctor as the attending physician if you want. You don't have to let go of every doctor. Nurses, the nurses are the main drivers of hospice. They visit at least once a week. They're mandated. Oftentimes it's more. You have a social worker, you see a chaplain is assigned. Again, he might have pharmacist or volunteer, or like might have a massage person. Like there's a million services that could be a part of a different hospice team.
yeah. Well, that's one picture where the person is still walking and living their
Mhm.
lives to the best that they can. What's another
Yeah.
picture that could happen?
I think the other end of the spectrum is also okay and happens is when someone is, at the end of their life, maybe they were in the hospital and they have always said they wanted to die at home. And they make the arrangements for someone to come home with the care of hospice, home being a private residence, a nursing home, nursing facility, assisted living, adult family home, or board and care, like any wherever you call home, um, and set it up for someone to come home and have hospice checking in on them, providing medicines, providing equipment, um, providing support to family and other caregivers. Um, Generally, hospice does not provide 24-hour care. So someone would, if they're needing help, going to the bathroom or eating or all of that stuff, you would still need that in addition to hospice care. Um, and then, that can be provided for however long that person needs. And then after someone dies, hospice provides bereavement support for a year to family.
A year.
Um,
That's great.
yeah. Checking in, sometimes counseling, sometimes groups, or kind of sending out, referring to different resources. Depends. That I think depends on the program that they offer. Um, the other thing that I'll say is they don't always provide 24-hour care, but if there is a symptom that's not able to be controlled in that setting and needs a lot more acute medical care, there is a part of hospice that will allow 24-hour nursing, whether where you live or in a hospice facility. But most people are not in hospice facilities. I think that's a myth too, is the hospice is a place.
Oh, okay.
I think of it as a service provided where you live. For the vast majority, though, it's not always the case.
That's true. Yeah, I think I've had both images in my head of like, yeah, a hospice team coming to someone's house, but I do also have that image of, okay, now you're moving them to like a hospital setting, for that
And
end
that
of.
sometimes happens, and I think that's also regional and health system, like what's available. Where I worked, the kind of suburban, exurban area that I worked in had a 6-bed hospice house for the entire county.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, most people were not there.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. What else comes to mind that is like what people might not typically think about when they're thinking about palliative or hospice care?
Yeah. I think of sometimes we think of hospice as like giving up hope, or we're giving up. So we're going on hospice, and often would talk to people about like how we're not necessarily giving up hope, or our hope might be changing. We might be hoping for something else, right? Previously, we hoped maybe for a cure, or maybe for remission or symptom management. And now we're hoping for comfort. We're hoping for quality of life. We're hoping for some time with our family, not in a hospital setting or in a hospital setting, or, it's really getting to know for each family and each person, what are we hoping for? Cause that can look different.
Yeah.
Um,
That's probably where I'm sure all sorts of different things, whether a family is spiritual and wants spiritual counseling and end
yeah.
of life, conversations around what happens next versus, yeah, no, I don't want any of that. What's next conversation? Maybe I need support around what are some of the things that people might need support around? And even the
Why
like
not?
funeral homes and like
hmm hmm
navigating that and yeah.
hmm Yeah, yeah. There's definitely like a logistical piece to it too, where we can start thinking about those things. And in my experience, people are thinking more about the logistical things, like, oh, I would want to be cremated, or I want to be buried here at this funeral home, or whatever spiritual or religious tradition. Um, and really, what I focus on with people is, yeah, it's very important, obviously, like what happens after someone dies. But really, I'm like, how do we want to live from
Yeah.
now for the time that we have? How do we want to live? Um, and there's no right or wrong answer to that. And so in palliative care, I think that's our main goal, is figuring out what are our goals, what are our hopes, what are our values, what matters most, and then aligning our medical care to that. Because I think a lot of times modern medicine is wonderful and can do amazing things, and it asks a lot of us too.
Mhm.
Um, it asks us to sacrifice time and feeling good, and it asks us so much of us and our families, and that's okay sometimes, and maybe not what we want other times, and all of that is okay.
Can you go a little more into that specifically? Like the piece around the medical system asking a lot of us. Can you give examples and why somebody might choose to not go that route and what they would rather do instead with their time?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hate feel like a lot of times you talk about cancer and there's so many illnesses out there that affect people. Um, that's what's coming to mind though, because I think it's what a lot of us are familiar with in a traditional sense. But when cancer treatment can take so much out of us, right? And so there's often another treatment that we're offered, another immunotherapy, another chemo, another whatever it is. Um, and I think sometimes we need to ask the question of like, okay, well, what am I likely to experience? What side effects? How much time do I need to go in to have this treatment? How often am I going to be getting this treatment versus what am I going to get out of it? Right. So am I going to potentially get months and months of life? And that's important to me. Or am I, we don't know, going to spend a lot of my life, even if I have months and months, feeling not well and in the doctor's office getting tests, this and that. And so someone might choose to have less time where they're feeling maybe a little better, um, knowing that they have less time. So someone might choose the opposite too. Like that's where we really would have these long conversations with folks about, okay, let's try to get all the information we can. We know a lot of doctors will give quick information. Let's try to gather as much as we can. And then really try to tease out what makes sense. And that's really, really, really hard. Very, very hard.
Yeah, because there's so many pieces, and I'm sure that does take a lot of time. But what comes to mind is that definition of Peter Levine's definition of trauma: too much, too fast for the nervous system is what causes trauma. So
Mhm,
you just slowing down the information
mhm,
gathering, that in and of itself, I think can reduce some of the trauma around
mhm,
for the
mhm,
person and for the family.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and also being aware of like different people wanting different information in different ways. So always checking in, is this information that you want? And maybe you do, but your loved one doesn't, or vice versa. And we can kind of customize that. Um, yeah, for sure.
It really does give a lot of hope. I think think of, when the time comes for my own parents, I think that's the best I would hope for, is that we would have time to prepare. Like we would not time to prepare as in you're gonna be prepared and you're gonna be okay by
Yeah.
the end. My dad, he lives in the veterans home. He's
Mhm,
blind and paralyzed from the waist down, really, really immunocompromised. And so, yeah, that's a natural fear of like, am I gonna wake up one day and like get a call that he's gone and he's in a different state? And right. And so as you were talking, I was like, wow, just to think about, like, no, like what if he slowly kind of, like, we knew this was coming and then there was this team that was helping us through it, like that, like gave such a difference in my own body of what that, because it's going to happen one day, right? I have to be honest about that. So I can see the hope in that.
yeah, yeah. Just really, um, we can't predict, right? We don't know exactly how it's going to happen. I do think that having these conversations, it can be really powerful to sit down with a doctor or a nurse and really delve into, what's going on. What am I worried about? Because sometimes what we're worried about isn't as likely to happen, but we never had the opportunity to ask. Um, Maybe the opposite, right? And so actually the VA, I don't know, has is pretty invested in palliative care. And so it can be worth like asking when to qualify for a consult or to have that conversation.
No, yeah, I think that's a great question for me to ask. And for others who are listening to this, like to just know that they might not even know how to bring that up to, a family member until like right when we're at the time where we have to make a decision. But what if
Hmm.
I was the one who like as I'm calling to inquire about what is new with his care, to ask, like, when would you guys start that? Like, what signs are you looking for? What would happen? And that's comfortable conversation, but that's going to be the most comfortable place to have that conversation with the doctor nurses who are already looking after him. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that would be amazing when families ask for, consults or are curious. That's amazing. I will say that, I can't speak for every health system, but I think that because palliative care, even as like a specialty in medicine, is new, I don't know, 10, 20 years. I think like 10, 15 years ago, having palliative care in hospitals was a new thing. So very, very new part of medicine. And that means that it's not always understood even within the medical community. And so I've definitely had patients who have said, "Oh, we asked about palliative care and we were told we weren't ready." It's like, I don't know that when we're ever not ready to have a conversation about that, that's all this is a conversation about what are you worried about? What are you hoping for? Um,
yeah, I could see
and
that
yeah,
conversation. Like, hey, we heard about palliative care. Can you tell us more about this? And they're like, no, 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 you're not at that point yet because they don't know a whole lot about it. Whereas
and
instead, the questions you might ask are like, cool, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. And what would let you know that we are getting close to that point? What
yep, yep.
are there other questions you can think of that somebody might have to spearhead that conversation with? If
That's a good question. I think it's just, yeah, having, I don't know the specific language, but it's just like having the knowledge and trying it out, and then self advocating, which we all know is a huge part of having a chronic or serious illness. And kind of like getting a second opinion. So if one doctor is like, "You're not ready," it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll ask another doctor. Um, I don't know that we're ever not ready. It just might be that the program in your area is not the right fit, which is unfortunate. Um, and I would say the other thing is that a lot of times people are waiting for their doctor to bring these things up. I hear from people, "Oh, well, the doctor will tell us when it's time for hospice. The doctor will tell us when it's time for this." And I think that's being deferential to our doctors can be a good thing. And also, um, I would always say again with hospice, there's two criteria that you have to meet, and there's only two criteria, and we can't always know when that second criteria is going to be met of wanting comfort focused care. That happens, and so if we're feeling ready for that or wanting,
you said
no,
that happens that happens what for
sorry, so yeah, so the two criteria for hospice are having a approximately 6-month life expectancy and wanting comfort focused medical care wherever you live. And wanting that comfort focused medical care can happen at different stages of illness for different people. Um, and so the doctor may have a different idea of when we should, quote unquote, pursue comfort focused care than the family.
That makes sense. Yeah. So especially if, like you said, it's still kind of relatively new, and so maybe even doctors are like, yeah, you're not like on your deathbed yet, like very extreme, and you're saying it can happen sooner than that and should happen sooner than that if that's what the family wants, and then that's where, of course, counseling comes in to understand how are you making this decision? Is this what you want? Here are the things to think about, and then we can make this decision together from a
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that idea can shift over the course of an illness too. So, what we say today makes sense for us. What our goals are for our care is one thing. And in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, it can be something else. And I think that's hard sometimes in the medical system for other providers to understand, is that like our goals of care and our values and our hopes change. And that's okay. Um, Also okay if the medical system is wanting something for you, wanting a type of care for you, and that's not what makes sense. So the medical system doesn't define quality of life. We as the patients and families just decide quality of life, and that might look different to a family. They may say that as long as they can open their eyes and smile at us, that's quality of life, and that's great.
makes sense. Is it typically hard to advocate for yourself in this system?
As a patient?
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's harder than it needs to be or should be. But I don't know that that's anyone's fault. I think that's like the way that our system is set up. People don't have a lot of time. It costs a lot of money. Health systems have incentives, and so I don't think it's like any particular doctor or health system's fault. It's the entire system. But yes, I do think that it can be up to us and hard to do.
If you could bring doctors and policymakers into a room and talk to what point would you want to convey most to them?
I'll probably come up with a better answer than this in like 2 hours. But what first comes to mind is what we call concurrent care in hospice. And so they actually allow that for pediatrics, which I'm not an expert in pediatrics, but my understanding is that um, hospice care can be provided alongside more like curative or disease-directed treatment for kids often.
So
And
basically alleviating a ton of pain while also going through life-saving treatments. Is that what that?
yeah, and the added layer of support of this interdisciplinary team coming in.
Right.
Again, I'm not the expert on that, but that's my understanding. And so that's what I would want for everyone with a serious illness is that like the day, I mean, you qualify for palliative care supposedly the day you get diagnosed with a serious or life-limiting illness. Again, we might not be able to access services based on limited services, but we should. And so we should be providing palliative care and or hospice care, this robust added layer of support of nurses, social workers, doctors, having time to spend with you, figuring out your goals, what's important to you, what matters most, alongside whatever treatment you're getting, whether you have to have a surgery or chemotherapy or whatever else is being recommended for your illness. I hope one day you can have both. You can have this robust team of people visiting you at home, providing all this care, and the quote unquote regular medical care at the same time. I think outcomes would be satisfaction and like longevity outcomes. I would imagine would be improved, but I don't have any data for that.
That sounds pretty ideal for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the work that you do, are you in private practice or are you in a setting right now?
So I have a private practice. I work with people with serious illness and caregivers, not necessarily even serious illness, more just illness, and like loved ones of people with illness. And
So you're
like
not
loss and
necessarily
bereavement.
doing like palliative, the therapy within palliative care, but some of your clients may be, and then others, but you have this background in like, how do we increase your quality of life in the worst of circumstances? So
Right.
when you are working with someone with a less severe illness, you have this vast background of again, how do we just improve your quality of life?
Yeah, how do you improve your quality of life and also just understanding the medical system? So like the barriers that people come up against, questions to ask their doctors. Because I worked in the health system for so long, I feel like I have an understanding of that, just no matter what type of illness it is. And I think a lot of people, any type of illness, are thinking about these things. You know, what happens if my cancer comes back? What happens if my illness gets worse? What happens if I get a new illness? What happens if something unexpected happens? I think we're all often thinking about that. And we can have those conversations now. Just because on paper your illness might not have a limited prognosis, that doesn't mean we aren't thinking about our mortality or thinking about death or what would happen. Also, the medical trauma that people are experiencing, regardless of the quote unquote severity of the illness, we know that the severity doesn't equal trauma level, I guess. Yeah.
I think what point comes up for me is like, so for a lot of folks with syndrome, like mind, body, like people who are really fibromyalgia and
Mhm.
Even sometimes I'm hearing people loop Ehlers-Danlos syndrome into that,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
this like mind body connection, which that's my main what I work with.
Mhm.
Um, they get labeled as, if you're thinking about your pain getting worse, and like again, there's our labs are showing we're doing great. Like everything, there's even like nothing on paper is wrong with you when you have fibromyalgia or like whatever. So you're
Mhm. Mhm.
for the problem. And it's like, actually, like, is it not the most human thing in the world to worry if something is going to get worse if there's no like support or checks in place? Or even if there are, like, if I'm scared of what the worst thing can be, my brain is going to bring me into a place where
Yep. Yep.
worrying.
Yeah.
There's nothing pathological about that.
No. No. That
So
sounds
that's,
normal to me.
yeah.
That sounds expected. Yeah,
I'm
and I
glad.
think that that's a huge point and so important no matter what type of illness it is that it doesn't yes, lab values matter and like your scans, I don't know. That all matters, sure. But like how do you feel day to day? So that's actually what we would say in palliative care is like, okay, the lab values say one thing, but what is a good day for you and how can we maximize those good days? Um, regardless of what the lab so your whatever lab might be super off, but you're not feeling that bad or vice versa. And so what's important is how you're doing. And is that a quality of life to you or not? And how can we make up the gap? My husband has chronic illness. He has heart failure. And he gets very, very fatigued. And so that's part of heart failure. And we're always like, is there something you could do? And they're always like, your labs look actually really good. We're really impressed by your labs. And we're like, that doesn't matter. He's getting fatigued. Like, what can we do? Um, and so it's like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's what is your day to day? How are you getting through the day? How can we improve that? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, no matter what the illness is. Um, And yeah, just going back to that fear piece, it's just so human. Of
Hmm.
course, you're scared. Of course, you're gonna feel angry. Of course, you're gonna feel like this drive to fix, this drive to what can we do, right? That's so human.
Hmm.
So just allowing for that experience, which it
Hmm.
sounds like you and your family do. Um, are there kind of coping mechanisms in that way that either you personally use or that you help clients use that you can think of? And I know it's hard to think of them without the context, but
Yeah. Yeah, it is, it's hard out of context, but um, a lot of self compassion, a lot of really allowing ourselves to feel whatever's coming up, um, trying to reduce self judgment. I think a lot of the standard therapy things kind of come into play. I think of something that my patients often are dealing with is like we're living our life and life is stressful. All these things are coming up, and then you add illness on top of that, and so where it's like we're always running at like a 9 out of 10. So it's just like one little thing that pushes us over the edge. And so how do we try to live not at a 9 maybe so that when these exacerbations or when these things come up, we're not necessarily being pushed over the edge, which isn't always as possible in our society that doesn't have a lot of supports in place for
right.
folks.
Which is kind of what we're talking about with, yeah, the palliative care piece. Like it would be nice if we could work on treatments, and also get a ton of extra support.
Hmm.
Medical coming to our house, that's invaluable
Hmm.
to know that I don't have to make this appointment every
Hmm.
month. I don't have
Hmm.
to, like, people are coming, and even the logistic support is emotional support
Hmm.
too.
Hmm. Hmm.
When someone, especially when someone else has taken that mental load over. So if you've got
Hmm.
a palliative care team, they've taken on the mental load. I would
Hmm.
assume, you can correct me if I'm wrong, for the most
Yeah,
part.
some of it. Yeah, I think a lot of times people are needing and wanting it like a case manager, which is not generally, I think, what's provided by palliative care. But I don't. Yeah, I mean, even our program used to be like we used to tell people, here's the phone number you can call, and you'll get in to the people in our program who answer the phone. So I was like, if you have to leave a message, they'll call you back, they'll get us the message. It's set up and like, you're not being sent into the abyss of like, I left a message and no one's going to call me back. I don't know if it's like that everywhere. It's where I live, but, it's like, that is emotional support, just knowing that I'm going to be able to call in with my question, leave a message and get a call back quickly, probably with an answer, or like, I'm working on the answer. Like, that's huge. And that's
Yes.
not how it works in most places.
Yes, that's exactly right. So there's a ton of logistical support. There's emotional support in a few different ways. It can, on the same token, be hard to advocate for yourself, and so that that might be a thing that happens, that's a struggle. What else have we not talked about or touched on in this world that really could be addressed here?
So a couple things that are coming to mind, and you can tell me what might be most interesting, is paperwork comes up for people, like advanced directives, when we're facing illness, and also called different things throughout the country, but like a pulsed form, like a CPR, DNR form, people might know about it, that comes up. And then also, we were talking about like, it kind of relates, like medical aid in dying, which is popping up around the country in different states. Not every state is illegal.
That's
But all
right.
of the
Definitely. Yeah. Maybe we can touch briefly on the first two, and then
okay.
very much go into what you know about suicide assisted care. If that's even the right name for it, you let me
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
But that
yeah.
is actually something I'm very curious about.
Okay. So sometimes when illness is coming up or just aging, in general, we're recommended to, anybody is supposed to have an advance directive, which is a legal form, um, that would identify someone to help make decisions for you, medical decisions or financial decisions, if you're unable to. Um, I think that can be very state specific how all of that works. So I don't want to go into details because I only know California, but I would say those are important depending on your state, depending on if you're married, depending on kind of if you're worried about family friction in making decisions. I I don't know that I'd put like that's the number one thing you should do, but the one resource I would recommend is called Prepare for Your Care. It's a website where I checked, actually all 50 states and Washington, D.C. have a version, that are legal in the state. And it really does a good job of calling out in a way that anybody can understand different medical decisions that might have to be made and allowing you to think that through. It's most important, I think, to have that conversation with your loved ones more than even writing it down. But I think Prepare for Your Care is like the best option. A lot of them are very legalese that I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So that's an advance directive. Then the other form that comes about usually when people are more seriously ill, have pretty limited life expectancy, is California, we call it a POLST, POLST, physician order for life-sustaining treatment. It can be like a MOLST or I don't know, there's a million things in the state. But basically, it asks about if you have preferences for various specific medical situations. It's signed by you or your healthcare surrogate or agent and the doctor. And it's a medical order that has to be followed. Whether paramedics come to your house or you're in the hospital, if they see that, then they follow those orders. And we can go into CPR and DNR and all of that. I would say if you're interested, you can talk to your healthcare professional. But the one myth I have is that DNR is, I think we think of it a lot as like no treatment. And a DNR, do not attempt resuscitation, is really only in a very specific circumstance. Yeah, there's a lot of myths about all that, but I don't know.
Yeah,
We should
yeah,
go into
no,
them.
yeah. You can say maybe just another paragraph on that. Of like,
Sure.
so doesn't mean you get no treatment. If someone is
Yeah.
bleeding in the road and they have a
Okay.
bracelet on that says DNR,
Okay.
what do you do
Yes.
next?
Yeah. So get in a car accident or you have a heart attack or something big happens, right? Something unexpected. A DNR, do not attempt resuscitation, or it comes into play only if you're not breathing and have no heartbeat. So if you have died, that's the definition of death. You're not breathing and your heart's not beating. Do we want paramedics or other medical professionals to attempt to bring you back? It's not a guarantee, but do we want them to attempt to bring you back? And that often would include, if successful, chest compressions, shocks to the heart, tube down your throat to help you breathe, and time in the ICU recovery. And it can be a very long and difficult recovery, and often people don't come back to where they were before the event if they do survive. And on TV, we see like shock, oh, they're alive, and we wish we had that intervention available. We don't. So it's only in that circumstance. So if we have a DNR order, we can still have surgery. We can still have chemotherapy. We can still have support helping us breathe. It's only in that one circumstance.
And can you say maybe just a little bit more about what might make someone, make that decision?
Yeah.
And I'll give you the example of why I'm asking. My dad was resuscitated.
Mm-hmm.
He died several times the first accident. He couldn't talk for a year and a half after, and then he had 3 to 5 second short-term memory loss. Couldn't remember what you said, 5 seconds. My dad is now like pretty, I say fully functioning, but he is blind. He's paralyzed from the waist down. But we talk on the phone often and use Siri on his phone since he can't see. And we can text, and sometimes I forget like that this isn't ever like normal relationship with your dad. But if he did tell me at one point years ago that if something were to ever happen, like don't bring him back again. I would imagine, I actually probably should just talk to him more about this, but I would imagine that's like the quality of life that he's already at. It would be so much worse coming back. So it's not like it's not that he would choose not to do this again. I really don't believe that that's true. I think he would want to see his grandkids and been with them, but at this point, then that's how I think he would make that decision. So is that kind of, am I on the right track with how someone might?
I think everybody's different. So that makes total sense. And I'm glad that he's recovered to this place that he has. Sounds like a difficult journey that is doing well now. But I think some people have very strong feelings, like especially some older adults will be like, no. And you're like, okay. They're like, when my time comes, my time comes. Okay, great. And other people, it is this more nuanced conversation. And maybe we don't make the decision. Maybe we do decide we're going to attempt resuscitation and see what happens, knowing that usually the forms have an option where like a trial period, kind of, we'll see how we go. I think it's really just engaging in these conversations with especially this one with a medical professional in your specific medical situation, what it might look like. But like what you're saying with your dad, maybe he started very high functioning and then now he's at this level. And if he went through that ordeal again, he would be at a lower level that he wouldn't deem acceptable quality of life. And that's okay. I mean, my husband was also resuscitated. And, he was a young firefighter, healthy firefighter. And now, he has heart failure, and we wouldn't not do that again. It's modern medicine saved his life. And it took its toll.
Yeah, really counts. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anything else about that before we go into okay. Yeah. So please tell me about what is kind of the new and what is important in this conversation about helping somebody die peacefully.
Yeah. So I think the term, at least where I am, that people are using is medical aid in dying, MAID, MAID. We try to avoid suicide in part of the title because it's seen as very different.
Stigmatizing and
stigmatizing and different. So I don't know how many states have medical aid in dying laws. I want to say it's like 15 or 20. I didn't look it up. It started in Oregon and California, or decades ago. And in California, it started in 2016. And there have been just more and more states adopting laws that are all kind of similar to the Oregon law. I can speak to, there's 10.
Yeah.
Oh, not as many as I thought.
This says as of 2023, medical.
Okay, that's probably about.
It does say, however, the need for dignified legal end-of-life option reaches far beyond the borders of those 10 states. So
Right.
yes, much.
Yeah, so there's 10 states that have a law allowing medical aid in dying. I can speak to what the law says in California. And I think other states are probably fairly similar, but I cannot be held to California. I don't even know if I'm the expert on
You're
this.
not a lawyer. That's the disclosure.
I'm not a lawyer. So what I know in California is that it's pretty actually simple, the criteria. One is you have to be 18. 2, you have to be a resident of the state. 3, you have to have a limited terminal illness with 2 doctors that state that your expected life expectancy would be 6 months or less, so similar to hospice. And 4, you have the mental capacity to make this decision. Yeah. So those are the criteria. If you meet those criteria and you can find a doctor you need 2 doctors, one is the attending physician, one is the consulting physician. The consulting physician basically just says, yes, this person has a terminal illness. The attending physician does a little bit more of generally an interview, making sure you are kind of understanding why you want to do this, that you are mentally competent to make this decision. And then they prescribe medicines that you can take to end your life.
So
There's a lot of,
they give those medicines to you and basically send you home. But I would assume there's a plan too of where you're going to die and all of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of intricacies that probably are state specific and like situation specific and doctor specific. But generally, you're prescribed the medicines. There's a couple different ways it can go. But part of it is that you have to be able to take it yourself. So whether that's swallowing the liquid or pressing a plunger, it has to be self-administered in whatever way.
That kind of look like an EpiPen type thing. You can.
So this is I don't know if I want to. My understanding is that it would you could push it through like a feeding tube, or sometimes there's like a rectal administration route too. I'm making this motion. It can't be on a podcast, but it's like a push of your thumb. But again, I think there's lots of ways that this can happen that are beyond my medical knowledge of how to make it accessible. And that's been there's been a lot of work from different advocacy groups about how different illnesses affect the ability to self-administer and how can we make it more accessible.
Yeah. Got to if you're quadriplegic, then you don't have use of your
right.
Also have a terminal illness. What do you do?
Right, exactly. And so
yeah.
It's kind of beyond
our scope of today's.
I was being therapist.
But these are questions that I think, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just sharing my curiosities and because most people don't talk about this stuff. Saying this is a really hard topic and this is a real thing that people go through. And maybe you just don't even know what questions to ask or where to start. And our conversation today is obviously very, very scratch the surface.
Yeah.
But it can spark that feeling secure enough to begin the conversations.
Yeah. I think that there's built into the law, at least in California, is the opportunity for any medical provider to opt out. So you don't have to participate, even if you're you as a doctor, you don't have to prescribe or be a consulting physician. You don't have to even engage in the conversation. Even if you're an interpreter at the hospital, you can say, I don't want to participate in this conversation. So that's built in because it is challenging for folks. But I would say if folks are interested in having a conversation, there are lots of people, providers out there. There's a whole doula network, end of life doula network. There's definitely information, and folks who will talk to you. Um, the other myth that I know, or not myth, but like question people have is what it says on the death certificate. Or at least in California, I would say it does not say suicide. It'll say whatever illness you have.
Oh, okay.
So like
Yeah, I wouldn't even. That's a huge piece.
cancer. Yeah.
Yes. So it would
Yeah.
say, yeah.
Or whatever other illness you might have.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Shouldn't it just be that even if you died by gun, died by suffocation, died by, I feel like that's just what it should say on the death
Yeah.
certificate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you were murdered, it doesn't say murder, right?
So like, yeah, the gunshot wound. Yeah, I think.
I don't know. Yeah, I would say like gunshot wound. So maybe I have to, would look into that. But yeah, why do we have to say suicide? We wouldn't say murder. We would say gunshot wound. So
Yeah. Yep.
anyway.
Same. Yeah, I never thought about that way, but yeah. So it's not considered a suicide. It's you're dying from your illness. You're just choosing a little bit more when that happens. There's also a difference in the states of like sometimes I think you have to ask twice, and there's different that you ask today and then a certain number of days later. There's they tried to put a lot of fail safes in the law to really make sure people are sure. And I have seen this kind of play out for a lot of different patients. And, some people make the ask and they don't take the medicines. They just like knowing that it's available. Like there's a lot of different ways that this
That makes sense.
plays out. Yeah.
This is a really difficult conversation. I just, want to appreciate you participating in it and starting that conversation. If people have more questions, I think you mentioned a website. Well, no, this wasn't about that. But prepare for your care is definitely. I'll link that in the show notes because that sounds really great resource for advanced directives and things like that. But do you know of any resources around just learning about medical aid and dying? I know Death with Dignity is a website that I've come across before, and I see it.
I can look up a good one. I mean, I kind of know where you would go in California. Oh, I think Compassion and Choice is probably, I can send you this link because it's like listing all the states and stuff.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And just so people know, this conversation it's not something it's not to be taken lightly. And that's why there are all these fail safes in place and why it does have to be a terminal illness. And obviously we advocate for, as mental health professionals, like our job is to half the time is helping people not take their own life. And that's not because there's it's not about morality. It's just, we also have seen so many people go through dark places and we also know too, that when people attempt suicide and they don't succeed, that they often are glad that they didn't. That's what our research. So this isn't the first choice by any means. It's not the first choice for anyone, but you are in a low place and you happen to be listening to this right now, just know, reach out for support first and foremost, and keep reaching out for support. That's incredibly important. And of course there is now we have the national hotline 988. Right?
Yep. I think you can text it too.
Yeah. If you if there's even a doubt in your mind that you don't want to go through with it, then you use that moment to call this number or to, and honestly, there's kind of something because I've worked with people too, where they're in such a low place, they reach out to friends and family don't know how to help. And that actually makes you feel scared. So sometimes these numbers, even though it might seem like cold and detached, like a 988 number, it's just detached enough that it might be the thing that makes you reach out.
Yeah. Yep.
Any other
Absolutely.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, I talk about this a lot, so it doesn't it feels normal to me. And I guess, I see them as two different buckets. But they're all worth reaching out for support. Um, Reaching out for support. We live in a death denying society, and I think that talking about it is the antidote to that. And so there's lots out there on either side of this equation.
I agree. Thank you for having this conversation. And I'm looking forward to publishing this.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need. And lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do if you found this episode helpful. And P.S., clicking subscribe ensures you'll be here for the next episode. See you then.